Hello, historical geology students. This is the next video for your class, and it is for the week of April the 12th to April the 18th, and this will be on the final exam. We're going to be covering chapter 14 in this short video, and it's about Mesozoic Earth history. Please don't forget, the Mesozoic era goes from 245 million years ago till 65 million years ago. And you also need to memorize the three periods of the Mesozoic. The three periods of the Mesozoic are the oldest period. The first period of the Mesozoic is called the Triassic period. And then is the Jurassic period. And the last period of the Mesozoic is called the Cretaceous period. So the Mesozoic era is broken down into three periods: the Cretaceous period, the last period; the middle period, the Jurassic period; and the Triassic period. Later on, we'll start talking about Mesozoic life, and dinosaurs appeared during the Triassic period, and they died out at the end of the Cretaceous period. Yeah, those are the three periods you got to remember. Let's go onwards and forwards. Lots of important things happened during the Mesozoic era. And here's a list of the 5 things that you want to remember about the Mesozoic Earth history. Pangaea broke apart during the Mesozoic era. Remember, Pangaea came together 245 million years ago, leading to the greatest mass extinction, the Permian extinction. Well, during the Mesozoic era, Pangaea broke apart. Another thing you want to remember about the Mesozoic era is that's when the Atlantic Ocean formed. The Rocky Mountains formed during the Mesozoic era. The Rocky Mountains out west are a lot older than the Appalachians, which were formed during the Paleozoic era, 290 million years ago. Large amounts of petroleum formed, including the petroleum in the Gulf of Mexico area that is supplying a lot of our petroleum needs at the moment. Lots of gold and other ore deposits were emplaced in continental plutons. That means batholiths and other igneous intrusive rocks on the west coast, and we'll take a look at that as well. Okay, first thing we want to talk about when we're looking at all of these Mesozoic deposits is that the first period of the Triassic just give me a moment here. Is that during the Triassic period, Pangaea had come together, and you can see that it 245 million years ago, it started to break apart during the Triassic period. Next period is the Jurassic, and you can see that Gondwana and Eurasia are moving away from North America, and the Atlantic Ocean started to form. Okay, so we go from the Triassic to the Jurassic to the Cretaceous. Now notice that during the Cretaceous, the Atlantic Ocean had formed. Also, there was this, look at North America. You had this interior seaway called the Cretaceous Interior Seaway that divided North America in half. Here's India here. India is an island, and it's moving north It won't collide with Eurasia until about 10 million years ago, forming the Himalayan mountains. Also, during the Mesozoic era, we have lots of these evaporite deposits here, as you can see here in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Tethyan area, which would later become the Mediterranean Sea, and in this area here between South America and Africa. Bottom line is, during the Triassic period, conditions were very dry. The coming together of Pangaea formed lots of deserts, and these deserts were a death knell for the amphibians that were so common. Those large amphibians that we were talking about during the Paleozoic era, they were decimated. 95% of them became extinct because conditions became so dry during the Triassic period. And the evidence for that is these evaporite deposits. Water evaporated due to the dry conditions of the Triassic period. Why did conditions become so dry on the land? Well, when Pangaea came together, it blocked the movement of many of these ocean currents that existed during the Paleozoic, and that led to dry conditions throughout the Triassic periods. Remember, dry conditions, the expansion of deserts during the Triassic, and formation of evaporites. And these dry conditions, by the way, would lead to dinosaurs being the dominant type of animals throughout all of the continents during the Mesozoic era. The dinosaurs dominate the planet during the Mesozoic era. During the Mesozoic era, the Appalachian Mountains continue to wear down, and you can see that lots of sand was deposited to the west from the erosion of these Appalachian Mountains. We start to see mountain building activity on the west coast. So the Mesozoic era is different than the Paleozoic era in one significant sense, and that is that the mountain building activity during the Mesozoic era is primarily on the west coast, forming the Rocky Mountains. Subduction occurred on our west coast during the Mesozoic, forming the Rocky Mountains, whereas subduction primarily formed on the east coast during the Paleozoic era, forming the Appalachian Mountains. So which mountains are older? The Appalachian Mountains are older. They were formed during the Paleozoic era, whereas the Rocky Mountains were formed during the Mesozoic era from subduction. So looking at North America from the Triassic to the Jurassic period, we notice that the Appalachians continue to wear down, and the wearing down of the mountains produced lots of sand that was deposited here in west of North America. This sand all came from the wearing down of these mountains, the Appalachian Mountains. Mountain building occurred on our west coast. As you can see, this mountain range formed here. This would eventually become the Rockies, and this formed during the Mesozoic era. By the Cretaceous time, the Rocky Mountains the Appalachians have worn down a lot, and you can see that they're a lot smaller in size. The subduction continued on our west coast, and then you had this Cretaceous interior seaway dividing this big island to the east and this big rocky island to the west. How do we know there was an interior seaway during the Cretaceous separating North America in half? We know because we find lots and lots of fossils of bivalves and phylum Synidria, corals, cephalopods, echinoderms that could have only lived in the shallow ocean. And so there was an interior seaway dividing North America into half, and it was called the Cretaceous Interior Seaway. Out west, the Rocky Mountains continue to grow larger from subduction on our west coast. Remember, during the Mesozoic era, mountain building occurred primarily on the west coast compared to the mountain building occurring on the east coast when we had subduction during the Paleozoic era. Another thing that you want to know about the Mesozoic era is we have the Newark group. Newark, named after Newark, New Jersey. It's where I was born, Newark, New Jersey. And these rocks here represent horse and grabens. You remember when we talked about horse and grabens earlier on? A divergent plate boundary formed normal faults here in these areas in orange. And what you're really seeing here is quite interesting and very exciting. These rift deposits from these rift valleys in these orange areas represent the scar that was left behind as Africa pulled apart from North America, forming the North Atlantic Ocean. And so I remember as a little boy my parents taking me to Palisades Park in northern New Jersey, and they would show us those old Rift Valley deposits. And the park ranger would say, "You see those rocks here out in the distance? You find those same rocks in Africa." Why? Because Africa used to be connected to North America, and the Newark group was the scar that was left behind with lots of normal faults from the Rift Valley that used to exist, and shows the place where North Africa pulled apart from North Africa. Africa pulled away from North America. That's what this is, these orange areas. Lots and lots of dinosaur fossils found in Mesozoic rocks. Dinosaurs are only found in Mesozoic era rocks. You will never find a dinosaur in Cenozoic era rocks or Paleozoic era rocks. They're only found in the Mesozoic era. So we call the Mesozoic era the age of the dinosaurs. These large dinosaur footprints are found throughout North America. Dinosaurs were land creatures, and we'll talk about them in the chapters that come up next. Another thing about the Mesozoic era is we find lots of deposits of reefs, coral reefs, and there's bivalves inside those coral reefs as well. Why is that important? Well, these deposits here that formed in the Gulf Coast region are rich in petroleum. Reef deposits are, if you ever look at a coral reef, they're filled with organisms, just teeming with life. What is petroleum but the liquefied remains of these organisms? And reef deposits are some of the best places to find oil. And the Gulf Coastal region rocks that are Mesozoic in age are rich in petroleum. Remember, we had subduction occurring off of our west coast during the Mesozoic era. Subduction makes mountains. And so during the Mesozoic era, we had lots of mountain building occurring on our west coast, not on the east coast. Here you can see there were many different mountain building episodes that occurred on our west coast. The Sonoma orogeny, the Nevada orogeny. An orogeny means a mountain building episode. The Severe orogeny, the Laramide orogeny. So west coast, on our west coast we had subduction and we had mountain building forming the Rocky Mountains during the Mesozoic era. And this subduction led to lots of plutonic rocks forming in batholiths along our west coast. Now look at all these areas here. These igneous plutonic rocks were formed during the Mesozoic era, and they formed batholiths, stocks, laccoliths, sills, and dikes. They cooled underground, these plutonic rocks, and they're rich in gold and other precious metals. So the other economically important resource we get from the Mesozoic in North America is precious metals in the batholiths that were formed along our west coast. Other things that are important for the Mesozoic you want to remember is the petrified forest. I don't know if you've ever been to the Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona, but when you go out to Arizona, you'll get a chance to see thousands and thousands of these petrified wooden logs that have been turned to stone. You can see every knot in the wood, where the insects were in the wood, and the grain of the wood. So remember, the Petrified Forest National Park rocks are Mesozoic in age. Just make a list of all the things that we covered in this video and in the next few videos, and write down, when did they form? They formed during the Mesozoic era. And then make another list for things that occurred during the Paleozoic era, so be ready for the next test. Lots of dune deposits occur in the Mesozoic, because remember, sand dunes form in the desert, and we know that conditions became dry after the Paleozoic era ended, leading to dinosaurs dominating the planet, because dinosaurs, we're going to find out later, thrived in dry conditions, whereas many other reptiles and the amphibians could not survive. They could not survive under those dry conditions. Another famous thing from the Mesozoic era you want to know about is the Morrison Formation, which is rich in dinosaur bones. In fact, and it's located in Vernal, Utah. My cousin lives there in Vernal, Utah. It's about 14,000 people there. A large LDS community, Mormon community. And anyway, when you go there, there's Dinosaur National Park. There are more dinosaur bones found in the Morrison Formation, including Tyrannosaurus rex, than any other sedimentary formation on the planet. And the Morrison Formation was formed during the Jurassic period of the Mesozoic era. Dinosaur rich. And when you go to Dinosaur National Monument Park, there are thousands of dinosaurs that are found in the Vernal, Utah area from the Morrison Formation. Here you can see some of the bones. My advisor, Dr. David Grandstaff, when I was working on my master's degree, his wife, Barbara Grandstaff, was a dinosaur paleontologist, and she'd go out there and dig out these bones, bring them back to the laboratory, and then use picks and sanding equipment and take out bone after bone after bone. They have to put these bones together to make complete dinosaurs to show in museums. It's a real interesting job as a vertebrate paleontologist. Another thing you want to remember about the Mesozoic era is that we have lots of accretion of terrains in western North America. What in God's name is a terrain? Well, let's take a look at the next picture here. This is what all of these areas here in brown and light brown were added on to the western edge of North America. And so each of these little pieces was a terrain. It was an island. And as subduction occurred along the west coast, these islands were added on or accreted on, glued on to the western margin of North America. Think about it like this. These areas in green existed at the end of the Paleozoic 245 million years ago. Another way of saying it was that this dark green area, the edge of it was the coastline 245 million years ago. And then all of these areas in dark brown and light brown, these islands, these terrains were added on at the subduction zone. They were added on to the western margin of North America. So all these areas in dark brown and light brown did not exist 245 million years ago. They were all added on to the western edge of North America. These terrains, these islands were added on to the margin of the western edge of North America. Next video we'll talk about chapter 15. We went through this chapter relatively quick because we need to get to the dinosaurs and human evolution part, where most people are interested in. I'll see you in the next video.